for a new year. I mean, you missed all of that, for God's sake. All right. In any event, let's get down to some good work. You know what? Open up your text, though. I'm going to read. And let's look at the first book of Samuel, chapter 28. And I'm going to begin reading with verse 3. I couldn't tell you, only in that I'm using a different source.
Maybe 260?
260? Is that, yes? Yeah. Page 260 in your text, folks.
What was it again? 1 Samuel?
1 Samuel chapter 28, beginning with verse 3. Little backdrop just to ease ourselves into the transition of the text, or transition into the text, to be more precise. King Saul is anointed king. And I say anointed, the term Mashiach, Mashach means to pour. Mashiach is essentially to anoint. And the prevalent custom was literally to anoint with oil. As in antiquity, so in modernity, certain oils are valued, certain oils are very precious, particularly expensive. I'm not just speaking dermatologically, they just are. And it was seen as the height of respect. It denoted, in the case of kingship, the beginning of a monarchy. We'll come back to this point, but it bears importance to repeat the textual ambivalence of having a king to begin with. That often is problematic in that the human being is flawed. It also makes a statement. What's the matter? God's word is not more directed and sufficient, that all of a sudden we need a king, along with all of the political implications. And I'm not talking partisan politics, human politics. I'll give you an example. The modern state of Israel has a Declaration of Independence. It doesn't have a constitution. And that was seen as a bit of a compromise, given the diversity, cultural and religious, from secular to hyper-Orthodox, Jews of every cultural background. There was a statement by saying that you have a constitution. It could be perceived among some as a usurpation of God's decree, though Israel's not a theocracy. All right, it's not, it's a secular state, a secular nation state with the parliament and so on. I'm just trying to draw an analogy here that might be of some value. King Saul is elevated to the first king of Israel, and he's in trouble. The Philistines, from which we get the name Palestine long before Islam, are a coastal people, many historians believe. Where exactly? Believe probably around modern day Gaza on the Mediterranean. You can see where I'm pointing. I feel like the weather man here. And the Westerners go. The Philistines are a force to contend with. Saul's respect, his emotional state are dwindling. He, at least according to a superficial read of the text, engages in a fatal flaw where he's instructed to annihilate, it's a moral issue worthy of discussion truly by itself, the Amalekites, and he falls short of that intended instruction, that intended goal. And the results of that disobedience leads to his decline. He's worried, as I said, the Philistines are on the rise, and he doesn't know to whom to turn. The prophets essentially rebuke him. God does not respond to him, as the text will indicate momentarily. The first king, in addition to which you can start seeing the unraveling of the man's psychological constitution. David, who is yet officially king on a public scene, but certainly he is more than the heir apparent, is on the rise, and he becomes really the titular leader of the Jewish people, certainly circa 1000 BC, about 3000 plus years ago, 3200 years ago. Okay, let's read. I'm going to read only because my text is slightly different, as I've done before with you, and if there are some real deviations or variations, indicate we can talk about the text. Though I don't have a Hebrew text in front of me, I might be able to shed some light on the discrepancy of interpretations. Now Samuel had died, and all Israel made lament for him. And he was buried in his own town of Ramah. Where is Ramah? Ramah means, by the way, Ramot, elevated. Ramah is over here. This is Jerusalem. And Ramah is slightly north of Jerusalem. Here you have the Kinneret, and here you have the Dead Sea. All right? So that's where Samuel is laid to rest. And Saul had forbidden recourse to ghosts and familiar spirits in the land. In other words, he outlawed it. No mediums, no ghosts, no witches, no sorcery, no necromancy. And that's important. We'll come back to that.
Was that common?
Yes. Common in the sense that you would find a 7-Eleven in every neighborhood. That I can't speak to. And I'm not being glib, but yes, it was common. One can argue with this, but I was taught essentially that the Bible, while it intellectually is probably a conglomerate of a lot of different themes and a lot of different overlays of history, tends to use an economy of words. So if something is there, there's a good chance it had some ubiquity. It was common. Okay. But in direct answer, yes, it was common. To what extent, I can't comment. I don't know enough. The Philistines mustered and they marched to Shunem and encamped, and Saul gathered all Israel, and they encamped at Gilboa. All right, I'm not going to fixate on the map here, but you get a general idea. The stronghold of the Philistines is towards southwest of Jerusalem on the Mediterranean. This is all Mediterranean. West of this boundary here, it's all coastal. What is called the Levant into northern Africa. And Gilboa is south of the Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee. Kinneret is the Hebrew, I'm sorry. Kinneret comes from the word kinor, which is a stringed instrument, a violin. Is a lyre a violin? Yeah, same thing. Yeah, more like a harp. Anyway, so the shape is somewhat like a violin, and hence the word Kinneret, or the Sea of Galilee. So we have Gilboa and Shunem, the very areas that are being referred to here. When Saul saw the Philistine force, his heart trembled with fear. And Saul inquired of the Lord, but the Lord did not answer him either by dreams or by Urim or the prophets. Two questions. Number one, are you following along? Is that pretty much what you're reading?
Yeah.
Number two, what are Urim? And Urim Betumim is the full expression. Urim comes from the Hebrew word or. God, I am sounding like, what is it, my big fat Greek wedding or something like that? And the word comes from the Greek, Urim. Urim Betumim. What are they? Yes.
The Kohen, the priest, the chief priest would wear that around his neck, and they were supposed to answer prayers, answer questions asked of them.
That's exactly right. They were oracles. So if an impasse was reached, I don't know, you don't know. You're kind of right, I'm kind of right. We're both kind of wrong. You know, it's a jump ball. The tradition was to consult essentially an oracle, a Ouija board. All right, it sounds crude, but to give an analogy of which we can all take hold of. I believe the first 5 books of the Bible are divine, whether they're the literal word of God, whether they're inspired by God or any other theological variations. One can debate, and ideally perceptions change as we change. However, I don't believe for a nanosecond that the foundational issues that human beings struggled with during the time of the Bible are in any way different than the issues that you and I struggle with today. So I don't want to sugarcoat or what have you. And I don't want to be crude either, but the analogies of a Ouija board, I mean, those are things that we still struggle with. We'll get into this a little more thickly when we talk about the witch Endor who's approaching now in the text. What do we do when we are so just beside ourselves? To whom do we turn when we're not getting the answers that we seek? What happens upon our demise, and so on and so forth? How can I maintain vitality in my life? Any variation of eternal themes. So the gloves are on from the standpoint that I and you revere these texts and take them seriously. By the same token, let's, and I mean no disrespect to say this, let's bring them down to the point where they were brought down to in its day as they are today, so that we can take hold of them and relate to them within our own narratives. And I think that becomes also a very powerful and important approach, let alone speaks to what I would argue very, very passionately, that this text, Old Testament, New Testament, these texts are as relevant as they were in the day as they are today. I always scratch my head when some say it's not relevant anymore. I really do, and I'm not above anything here. Yeah, I do too, actually. But without wagging my finger either. Listen, I've fallen in love with opera, and this is a relatively late attraction that I have. And I understand it's not for everyone, right? And certain aspects of religion is not for everyone too. So I kind of get it. Some people like sports, others don't, and what have you. All right, anyway, you kind of get the point. Let's move on. All right, so Urim or the prophets. Verse 7, folks, chapter 28, verse Saul. I'm saying this for those who are listening via the platform. Verse 7. Then Saul said to his courtiers, "Find me a woman who consults ghosts so that I can go to her and inquire through her." And his courtiers told him that there was a woman in Endor who consulted ghosts. Few things cry out here. Number one, Saul passes this edict, no sorcery, no necromancy, no ghosts. And now all of a sudden, his back is up against the wall and he asks his confidants, find such a person. I don't think that is just an en passant statement. Underlying this text, this book of Samuel, is a stated, but now subtle, more than ambivalence with regard to the monarchy. We need hierarchy in life. We need structure. A computer needs structure. That's why we format now, an anachronism, but essentially a hard drive. So we can compartmentalize things, so we can move, so it can work, so it can function. Life has hierarchy. There are rankings, ideally the results of some type of meritocracy, not because of other issues in life, one's sexual orientation or color or gender or what have you, or ethnicity and so on. But there is the sense, do you really want a king? And this is pure unadulterated hypocrisy. Most of us are inconsistent. But when you say you cannot do this and then you go ahead and you do it, there's a definition for that, a hypocrite. And I don't doubt for a nanosecond that that is more than a subtext to having read this and having the text make mention of it. Keep that in your data bank. Second thing, Endor, the witch of Endor. She's really a necromancer. She's the one who will engage spirits, deceased human beings. The word Endor can mean a number of things. One, ayin or ma'ayan, which means a well. And Dor, D-O-R, I don't know how it's spelled in the transliteration in your text, it is here in mine, means generation. Jews not uncommonly will sing in the liturgy, Lidor Vidor, from generation to generation. So a well for the generations, or a well that continually produces fresh water. Ayin Dor can also, with an ayin, and that's how it's spelled, the Hebrew letter ayin, can also mean one who can see the generations. So the words are laden with meaning here.
But it's not a physical place.
Yes, good point. It is a physical place. I'm sorry, I should point that out. So she's the witch of Endor. She's the witch of Sacramento. She's the witch of, oh, was that Freudian? All right. Knock it off, all you guys.
But does that mean that Saul has to either herald her from a distant point to come to Jerusalem, or does he in turn go to the distant point of Endor?
It's the second astute point. Saul, goes up to Endor. Endor is also somewhere in the southern region of the Galilee, and somewhere in this general area here. So this expanse of travel and the unfolding of time, I don't fully grasp it myself. Israel is not large. It is from its north to its southern tip. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Is shorter in distance than the length of the Grand Canyon. It's only 300 and some odd nautical miles, and that's from the north to the south by Suez and of course Egypt next door. But still in all, if Saul is located, Samuel's buried here, and Saul's he's navigating somewhere in the region or in the heart, the belly of Israel. It's still a considerable distance. And there are hills. Israel does get snow. You can ski in the wintertime on the Golan, the Mount Hermon. I can testify to that. I used to love going skiing, and I went skiing in Israel. Yes, sir.
Well, I was just gonna say, does that mean that we should invest even more in this judgment of hypocrisy? Because Saul is actually going away from the point of military crisis.
Excellent point. Excellent point.
He's going away from where the Philistines are presumably threatening the balance of the country.
Yes, however, he's not shirking his responsibility. He wants someone to tell him what's going to happen. So it's not, now you can argue, well, no, I would argue, and you'll see, he finds out what's going to happen, and sure enough, what he finds out does in fact happen, but he doesn't back down. So he doesn't shirk from his military
Yeah,
responsibilities.
I didn't mean to suggest that as much as to show how the extent of crisis in Saul's imperium had him go from the field of battle in order to serve his mission, undoubtedly, but still, nevertheless, went away from the point of crisis.
It's a very nice point. Yeah, I think it's an astute point. Yeah, appreciate that. Okay, so what ends up happening? Verse 8, Saul disguised himself. He put on different clothes and set out with two men. They came to the woman by night, and he said, please divine for me a ghost. Bring up for me the one I shall name to you. But the woman, this is by every outward measure, a decent woman. The woman answered him, you know that Saul, you know what Saul has done, how he has banned the use of ghosts and familiar spirits in the land. So why are you laying a trap for me to get me killed? She doesn't know to whom she is speaking. He's a hypocrite.
Wow.
And this is not an arbitrary, just in passing little piece of text, a few sentences. Saul swore to her, verse 10, folks, by the Lord, as the Lord lives, you won't get into trouble over this. What made her trust him? I don't know. Was she on to him all along? I don't know. Did she herself feel threatened by if she didn't do it? Perhaps. That's a sidebar worthy of its own. At that, the woman asked, whom shall I bring up for you? He answered, bring up Samuel for me. Then the woman recognized Samuel, and she shrieked loudly and said to Saul, why have you deceived me? You are Saul. And there'll be an interesting parallel when next week we focus our attention on King David, when Nathan will say, Ata Ish, you are the man. The prophet Nathan will confront the powerful King David, and he'll say, you are the SOB, essentially. And that's effectively what the text is saying. All right. Verse 13, the king answered her, don't be afraid. What do you see? And the woman said to Saul, I see a divine being coming up from the earth. What does he look like? He asked her. It is an old man coming up, she said, and he is wrapped in a robe. Then Saul knew that it was Samuel, and he bowed low in homage with his face to the ground. Samuel said to Saul, by the way, this again, I actually do believe there's humor in the text. I just do. It's not the Bible, God forbid, is a comedy book, but it's real. Again, and it's speaking to real people, both then and now and future. But picture this. You can see, think of the movie Ghost with Whoopi Goldberg almost, it's just where you remember, I thought that was a great movie, actually. I really did. Do you have any idea what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not that convinced there was more yeses than no. All right, anyway, but if you haven't seen it, go and Netflix it or whatever.
Pottery. Yeah, we're there. Demi Moore.
That is one of the most romantic scenes ever. But anyway, okay. But I digress. Yes. Anyway, so here's the humor. Just picture this. So Saul is scared to death. He meets up with this intermediary, this necromancer. She brings up Samuel. We know Samuel's dead and buried in Ramah. And finally, Samuel, you could just see him kind of stretching or whatever. It's a little bit of an embellishment, but what does he say here? Okay, verse 15. Samuel said to Saul, "Why have you disturbed me and brought me up?" In other words, I was just doing fine. Well, why are you bothering me? All right. I can tell that went over well. I think this is very funny. I actually do. I could just see it, and the implications are the ones that I do want to focus in for the remainder of our session this morning with regard to afterlife and so on. We'll come to that. But, would you just leave me alone, and I think there's even a more sharply stated irony here. We read this text with a 2020 hindsight. We know what's going to happen. Many of us have read this multiple times and have studied this text. Sections in the Old Testament and the New Testament. We know it and we read it again and again. And invariably, it yields new insights because it's not static. It's constantly variable because we, the reader, are variable. We approach it at different times in our lives and so on. But the idea that Samuel says to Saul, "Why have you disturbed me and brought me up?" It's also a way of saying, wait a minute, I've told you all this before. I told you the kingship is stripped from you. I told you David is going to succeed you. You know that. Why are you bothering me? So therein lies also an undertow. But I do think it is and can be seen as somewhat humorous. Let's continue. And Saul answered, "I'm in great trouble. The Philistines are attacking me, and God has turned away from me. He no longer answers me either by prophets or in dreams. So I've called you to tell me, what am I to do?" Samuel said, "Why do you ask me, seeing that the Lord has turned away from you and has become your adversary?" That's a very harsh comment, no question about it. Verse 17, "The Lord has done for himself as he foretold through me. The Lord has torn the kingship out of your hands and has given it to your fellow, to David, because you did not obey the Lord and did not execute his wrath upon the Amalekites. That is why the Lord has done this to you today. Further, the Lord will deliver the Israelites who are with you into the hands of the Philistines. Tomorrow your sons and you will be with me, and the Lord will also deliver the Israelite forces into the hands of the Philistines." Did you hear that? Did I read that too quickly? No. Tomorrow your sons and will be with me. Verse 20, at once Saul flung himself prone on the ground, terrified by Samuel's words, and off to the races we go. Okay. Now, I'm going to zero back to this text in a moment, but I want us to conclude a brief and an overarch of Samuel 1 with the last chapter. And let's look at chapter 31. All right, so put everything that we just read in chapter 28 on hold. And let's move forward to the last chapter, and you get an idea of what the first half of the books of Samuel ends with. The Philistines attacked Israel, and the men of Israel fled before the Philistines and fell on Mount Gilboa. Again, here's Gilboa up here. The Philistines pursued Saul and his sons, and the Philistines struck down Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchi-Shua, sons of Saul. The battle raged around Saul, and some of the archers hit him, and he was severely wounded by the archers. Saul said to his arms bearer, "Draw your sword and run me through, so that the uncircumcised may not run me through and make sport of me." But his arms bearer in his great awe refused, whereupon Saul grasped the sword and fell upon it. Follow what happens? Yes? Clear? If not, let's discuss it. When his arms bearer saw that Saul was dead, he too fell on his sword and died with him. Thus Saul and his 3 sons and the arms bearer, as well as all his men, died together on that day. In any event, that's effectively how it ends, as was foreseen by the witch of Endor and the battle of the Philistines. On the horizon, and actually even closer still, is the rise of King David. And that's where we'll pick up next week, but focus specifically on the episode with King David. We'll talk a little bit about his background and the encounter with Bathsheba, which is a very, very pain-filled section of text. But more on that later. Saul is dead. Let's go back now and raise some issues and touch on some of the implications that this often unknown section of Bible raises, specific to the witch of Endor, bringing back Samuel essentially from the grave, and things of perhaps a more contemporary twist or influence that is raised the results of this very peculiar, and I would argue often ignored but important piece of work. Question I have, and this is all under the category of what we call eschatology. It is pure speculation. Eschatology, speculation on what occurs upon our demise. And I'm not speaking in a physiological sense, a cessation of life, no brainstem activity, decomposition of the body. I'm not speaking in that term. Are we more than mammalian? Are we more than just physical beings? It has been my contention, and some of it is, I can't give you a percentage, but some of it is pure speculation on my part, that we are also spiritual beings, that we're not just physical creatures. And I don't think that is in any way A, inconsequential, but B, coincidental to the text, that there's a focus on Endor. The editor could have very easily, sanitized the text. Saul says no necromancy, and it's done, never to be heard from again. And I think it is also the editor's directive, or one editor's directive, or a small handful of editors, to counterbalance what can be seen as so day-to-day, so mundane. Mundane, not in a pejorative sense, but how to build a nation, how to create a polity, how to deal with day-to-day issues, that we lose sight of some of the spiritual issues in our lives. And it's amplified further in that Saul himself undergoes a certain cognitive dissonance here. He's afraid to kill himself. He wants someone else to do it. The someone else refuses to do it, and Saul has to do it himself. But what's the cognitive dissonance? If he believed there really was something beyond his existence, is he afraid to confront that, perhaps? Or does he not accept it? And that is part of the paradox and the angst that we feel. We don't know. But let me digress ever so slightly. There are so many things in life of which we cannot tangibly prove that define who we are. You cannot, no apologies, you cannot prove love exists. You cannot. You might say, well, it has physical implications and that your heart rate will increase or what have you. But you can't take hold of it. You can express it. You know when it's absent. You know when it's present. It's not corporeal. And by the way, the range of emotions fit that category. Hatred also. You can't prove it. You can show it. Other important things in life. Now, if you do want to intersect this idea of things exist or we believe exist that we can't prove, physics in many ways, I think structurally is very similar to theology. There are certain speculations that are believed to exist that haven't been proven. A quark is perhaps most notably. Circumstances are such that we can conclude it exists, but we can't prove that it exists. And I'm not here to make this airtight argument. We can't prove it. But I would ramp it up a notch higher. And I do believe this is an offshoot of a text that speaks about the succession of monarchy, the transition from the prophets to the kings, judges to the kings. I would ramp it up a notch. Intellectually, I am actually satisfied that we don't know for sure. If we did know for sure that there's something beyond our existence, and if we knew for certain that there isn't something beyond our existence, in either case, I think it would drive us mad. I actually do. If I knew that there was a better existence awaiting for me, and by the way, I happen to believe that, and it's a mainstream Jewish thought, where do you think Jesus gets some of these things? Jesus didn't read the New Testament. What does it take a verstunken a Jew to tell you that? If I do believe, but if I knew for certain, and I'm not even hedging here because I love life, and I hope you do too. Things get bad, just hit the reset button. And then the counterbalance. If this is all there is, so life is nothing but an ellipsis, the unknown before we're born. The period of years that we're on this planet, we die, and then and then oblivion. You follow? Just oblivion, that's it. But the implications are even greater. If this is all there is to our existence, then a Solzhenitsyn shares the same destiny of a Himmler or a Pol Pot or a Stalin. It may be. The issue for us religious seekers, and I mean us religious seekers, Jew, Christian, religious seekers, serious religious seekers, is not to prove God's existence. We can't. It's a non-starter. It's foolish. The issue for us is the consequences, the importance of ascribing to something greater than all of us. Not because we are insecure. I'm not insecure in that area. I have insecurities. That's not one of them. We don't know. This is, I keep going back, and I don't mean to grandstand. This is an astounding little aside within a broader text here, tucked away. Yes, most Jews, they don't know who the witch of Endor is. Somehow they read this stuff, they don't. Jews call themselves the people of the book. They don't know what the book has to say. Please, by all means.
Have you edited, innocently of course, but have you edited the passage where Saul says to the arms bearer, kill me so the uncircumscribed, circumcised, or the uncircumcised, so that they don't kill me? And by that, I mean, isn't Saul thoroughly invested in the proposition of the afterlife when he goes to the witch of Endor, calls up Samuel, and he doesn't go, oh my God, I didn't know you didn't exist. He says, well, thank goodness you're here. And, you know, I now hear your terrible prophecy. So isn't Saul already, hasn't he already manifested his belief and conviction in the afterlife when he's gone to the witch of Endor, notwithstanding his earlier prohibition of these practices?
Maybe. I still would argue it's a cognitive dissonance. Listen, he clearly sought out the witch of Endor. And you pointed that out. Physically, he relocates, he seeks her, he goes to her. And he goes to her with a specific mission because he does believe that she or others like her can wake the dead, connect with the dead. But I still feel there's a cognitive dissonance in the sense that he wanted someone to kill him. He couldn't do it himself.
Was that driven by shame, or was that driven by uncertainty?
That's a fair question. I'll leave that to our own devices. That's a fair question. Yeah. What do you think on this one? Seriously.
Shame.
Yeah, see, and I would think it would be more honor filled for him to fall on his own sword without, I think it was chicken. Yeah. Yeah, please.
In the story, the acceptance of Samuel, coming back from under the ground, isn't that a recognition? And there's no questioning about it. They don't say, "Oh my God, this is amazing." It's like, "Oh yeah," isn't that a statement that there is life after death?
Yes. Yes.
At least in the Jewish context.
Yeah. Listen, folks. Again, the similarities are shocking. I know theological divides, but I'm not saying let's all sway in the wind either. There's good, theological debate is healthy. But after, the day is done, we all struggle with similar narratives. We just do. My inner circle, family and friends who have died, I feel I speak to them. And I actually believe in some way, my feet are reasonably, planted on earth. I'm I think overall rational thinker, unless I'm just simply deluding myself, and I'm being honest here. I believe they're talking back, speaking back to me. I actually believe that.
It's a dialogue.
Yes, but not, yes, a type of dialogue. And I don't want to, in my case, I can't speak for you folks, but it's not like I fixate on it either.
No.
And I don't think that, I would argue, I don't think that's healthy. Do you know there's a tradition within Jewish circles that before the Jewish New Year, there's a tradition that one visits the graves of deceased loved ones for a very specific purpose, and that is to pray using them as the vehicle through which we in the living are assured another lease on life, a new year. Now, I'm not a superstitious guy. I don't like superstition. I think it's a form of idol worship. I actually do. I'm probably the least superstitious man you'll ever meet. You know, but not but anything. So I don't see that as superstitious. It doesn't resonate with me. But on a personal level, I lost a sister 17 years ago. I honestly don't believe there's been a day where in some way I think about her. And for a time, I actually believe she was our daughter's guardian angel. I really do believe that. You know, you want to commit me to an insane asylum? All right, I'll go willingly. But I don't think we're not just physical beings. We're not, you know it. Maybe we don't say it enough. And you know what I feel is a travesty. We're not fighting a serious fight against a secularist juggernaut of thought. And I love the secular world. And this is not, you know, religious triumphalism either. I struggle with the notion of God, but we're not articulating on the world stage sophisticated ideas that, after it's all said and done, are not sentimental. They're real. And yes, you know, existentialism is important as a sidebar or an embellishment to philosophical inquiry. But we are abnegating these discussions. This is where the rubber hits the road with healthy religion, of which no religion has a monopoly. These are the issues. They're eternal, they're timeless. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were going to say something. Yes.
I was just gonna say that, I think one of the points being made is that Saul, the reason for not consulting necromancers is that you're supposed to relate to God.
Yes.
God is
right.
your source, your ultimate, you know, and you're not supposed to be praying to other beings. And I think that was one of the reasons why Saul just wasn't acceptable as a Messiah, because he didn't follow what God wanted him to do. And in the sense of, like, he was supposed to kill King Agag.
Yeah,
You know, he was not supposed to let his men profit by they weren't supposed to take home animals and fancy stuff. I mean, it was supposed to be much more detached.
I concur.
So the fact that he was calling up, it's more than hypocrisy. It's like, you're the Messiah. You're supposed to lead my people to.
Well, he's not attributed a messianic statement. Let me clarify something if I misled you. The term Mashach or Mashiach comes from being anointed. But no, he was anointed king, not Messiah. Mashiach also, Yehoshua in the case of Jesus is seen as salvific. Okay, that's different. But that is the antecedent that gives rise. Christianity is not on the scene for another 1,000 or more years at this point. I don't want to confuse the two, but let me just go back to your earlier point, which I could not agree more heartily. Yes, it is. It's a slight on God, but the issue all of us have is, what is it that God wants us to do? I read this, though I don't remember it per se, but I believe it was in the 70s, maybe a little earlier. there was a campaign, what would Jesus do? And again, I'm reading it in the backdrop of history, and I still think that is such a powerful and important orientation. Jews don't say that. I mean, let me. Jews don't say, "What would God want from me?" And I think it's a travesty. Right. They'll say, what does Jewish law have to say? Right. But what does God want from me? It's much bigger than that. Absolutely. Here, some other issues that are raised as we delve a little bit more deeply. By the way, we're on until 10:15, is that right? All right, so I'll certainly hold to that. Raises issues of reincarnation and resurrection of the dead. And I want to say this also as a precursor to Christianity and the social setting in which Jesus himself lived. These issues were discussed within channels of Judaism in first century, certainly. The issue of reincarnation, or in Hebrew, the Gilgul HaNefesh, the almost the revolution of the soul being eternal, emphasizing, re-emphasizing, underscoring that we're not just physical beings. There's a spiritual side to us, an unfulfilled life that can essentially reconstitute itself. We don't know. Again, this is where the lights start to dim and what have you, and people can get a little queasy on stuff like this, and I understand that. But that is not an alien notion, certainly to the antecedent of Christianity, being Judaism. The idea of resurrection of the dead. And again, we come back to, as we're in the subject of eschatology, speculation on what occurs upon our demise. Maimonides, who was a prominent thinker in the 12th century, more like the early 13th century, he was dogmatic on the issue of resurrection of the dead. He felt that if one did not subscribe to that notion, one would cut oneself out of the tradition. That's how adamant he felt. The idea of Michaye Hametim, or the dry bones of Ezekiel, that Ezekiel will speak about, that they will once again, come together and sustain a life sometime in the future, or what have you. A comment, question, please.
Well, and one of the questions, like, I just want to state the obvious as I'm reading this about resurrection of the dead is, what the heck is Samuel doing? Like, where is he and what is he doing? Like, what are the dead doing before they get resurrected? Right?
But again, I mean, beats me, right? Beats me. Well, this is interesting because there is a commentary that, there are people that just don't want to be bothered, and that's essentially how Samuel is portrayed. It's like, leave me alone. I served my time. I'm retired. Knock on someone else's door. But fair enough. What they're doing and what have you, whether it exists, again, I don't know. But that doesn't mean that there isn't value in speculation. Now, we understand that if we focus too heavily on this, we lose sight of the here and now, and that becomes problematic. If, it's always, we'll wait for a reunion upon our demise. I think there's something very heartwarming, and I identify with that. But by the same token, there are so many things we can do, as we all are aware, to make our existence more heavenly, as it were.
Yeah.
The very notion, that dichotomy of heaven and hell, Gnostic literature and Zoroastrian thought, demarcation of a demiurge or some underworld existence. The Bible talks about the valley of Gehenna, or to go to Sheol. These are regions where cremations took place, where bodies were prepared for burial and the like. This is where we start really getting into the weeds, and I don't want to direct us there, certainly at this point. And I think it's sufficient just maybe to end on a more upbeat note. And that is, the speculation is there. I would argue it's healthy. We can't just navigate in the physical. Where we find that stasis between our physical existence and our spiritual existence, that's for the individual to determine. And invariably that will change according to, and I mean no disrespect to say this, I'm almost sounding like I'm patronizing, you folks know as well as I do. It varies according to different situations in our own lives and circumstances perhaps that we don't understand and are certainly beyond our control. Saul dies a tragic death, and he's not a bad man. He's just not. He's a flawed man, but that's a cliche. I haven't met a perfect human being. I sure as heck am not one. But what becomes essentially not so much the denouement of the text, the high point, the apex, but certainly a vision of the text or a narrative of the text that leads us towards the end and the conclusion of the first half of the book of Samuel, I think is intended. The location, the end of the story, how he dies, the interaction with the witch of Endor. I think that brings us back more to earth, to the day-to-day. As I said, and now I repeat, it is tucked away within the recesses of the Hebrew Bible, but it is there. And the truth is, it's in here for us as well. Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. Next week, we will talk about some human interaction. As I said, the prophet Nathan, and talk about King David, talk about his lineage that leads to the precursor of the Messianic vision as well, and hope. Good morning, all.